Welcome to Do You Ever Wonder? The show that brings you answers to many of the questions that you may have, but with no one to ask. Do You Ever Wonder is hosted by Mike Haltman, CEO of Hallmark Abstract Service, who, like you, has always been deeply curious about a wide variety of topics. Each week, Mike will be speaking with guests who are leaders in their field and who have inspirational stories to tell. So now, sit back and enjoy the show.
So, welcome everybody. My name is Mike Haltman, and you talk about leaders in their field, and I am honored and privileged to have a leader in her field. Her name is Tina Miraglia. She is a partner at DL Partners in real estate. But more important than all that, and I've had guests like this before, she went to the State University of New York at Albany, and that just supersedes everything because to meet and speak with a Great Dane, it's the best. So welcome, Tina.
Thank you, Mike. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Believe me, it's my pleasure. So, just as an aside, before we get to real estate, this is a perfect example of networking, of reaching out to people, of kind of like a what the hell attitude when it comes to business development. So this happens to be Tina's first podcast, and that is I am so thrilled to be her first. And I was at a conference at 22 Vanderbilt, I think, and
Mhm.
I got a message from Tina. We're connected on LinkedIn, and her office was a couple of blocks away, and we met, and here we are today. So I think it's a fantastic story and an example for people that you really do have to. Sometimes you have to step out of your comfort zone a little.
I totally agree. And it's so funny because I'm telling my 14-year-old son that all the time. Get out of your comfort zone, and it's okay. And it's a little scary, but it's exciting. And I've been, connected with you over LinkedIn now for a year, and I've been listening to your podcasts. And that email sat in my inbox for probably a week. I drafted it. I wanted to reach out to you. I was like, I would love to talk to him and be on his podcast, and it would be my first podcast. And my colleagues kept saying, send it. And I did. And I feel like it's one of those things where like we were meant to meet because you happened to be in the city that day. I happened to be in my city office that day. And the rest is history. And this is my first. So thank you for having me.
Okay, believe me, it's my pleasure. But the rest is history, and I tell my kids that too. And since I've gotten a little bit older, I've stepped out of my comfort zone. I've done things that I probably never would have done, and I appreciate it. You know what? The feeling of accomplishment is huge. So, I'm sure this is not going to be your last.
Well, thank you. Thanks. I hope not. This is so fun and exciting.
Absolutely. So, Tina, you are a real estate attorney. Your focus is mostly on sponsor-driven deals on the sponsor side.
Correct. So my office, mostly we represent developers. They're the sponsors. And so we'll be on projects in the city for many, many years. It takes a long time to build new construction in New York City. And so we'll really get to know our clients, and we'll work with them for years on the planning process. And we'll work with the architects, and we'll work with the management companies, and we'll work with the exclusive sales agents. And then while they're building the building, we're doing all the legal work. And I will sign contracts, let's say today, for a building that's going to be under construction for the next 2 years. And the contracts will just sit in my file. What?
Any contracts with buyers.
Exactly, contracts with buyers. So people like yourself or me and my husband, they're looking to buy a condo. They'll sign a contract today, put up a deposit, and this building will be built in 2 years. And then I'll call their attorney in 2 years and say, hey, we're ready to close. Come on in. So it's a wild ride.
Wow. So you've worked with many, many developers. I don't know if it's privilege, but who are some of the bigger names that you've worked with?
Yeah, no, it's not privileged. It's all like public information. We write these offering plans that are public documents that the Attorney General's office disclose who my principals of the sponsor are and who we are as their attorney. And so I've done several projects for Toll Brothers.
Okay.
They're a national company. I actually personally live in a Toll Brothers house. It just happens to be, I live in Westchester County and I'm in a Toll Brothers house. But we did like 77 Charlton for them. We did Pier House for them. I did the terrain for them. And I think way back, I did their first city projects. I think it was like 110 3rd maybe, and 308 North 7th, I think were Toll Brothers. We represented Elad Properties. So Elad are the ones who did the Plaza Hotel, but I did 225 Fifth, which was the Grand Madison. I did that for them, which was 200 units. And then we also did the Link for Elad, which was 310 West 52nd. And that was over 200 units. Those two buildings were interesting for me because one building was delayed and one was actually ahead of the game, and I ended up closing both buildings at the same time. So we had 400 units closing at the same time.
That's a lot of moving parts. So what moved one ahead of schedule and what pushed one behind schedule? Just issues with contractors, issues with the city?
Yeah, that's all about construction, and I'm not involved in their day to day with the construction aspect of it. We're always in touch with the architects and the expediters as far as timing and where they are overall, because I think one of the biggest problems with the new construction is the buyers, I think sometimes they have false expectations as far as like when we're going to be ready to close. And there's so much legal work and there's such a process here, right? Where we're working with the Department of Finance and we're working with the Department of Buildings and the Attorney General's office. But there's so much going on that has to be coordinated all at the same time. So any one of those gets delayed,
So
it throws the whole project off.
whose job is it to set the expectations? The developer?
So what we do in the offering plan is we have to project what we think will be our first year of operation. When do we think I might have my first closing? And so we talk to the developers, we talk to the architects, we talk to the expediters, and we give it the best shot we can, right? Taking into account, the whole entire process, even the legal process besides the building. And then look, under the AG regs, if I don't close one unit within that year, every buyer can cancel. So they are protected if the buildings get delayed too far.
Within the year of your projected first closing.
Correct.
So it's a 2-year construction, give or take. So
Yep.
if you project that 2026 is your closing year for the first closing, if in 2026 in its entirety, or is it a year from your projected first closing date?
So it's 1 year is what we have to project. So like, here's an example. I had a building where the first year of operation was January 1st of 2020. We all know what happened in 2020.
Sure
I
did.
had to close a unit by December 31st of 2020. That building has 183 condos. Those buyers had been in contract for 2 years. This construction site got closed down because of COVID, right? I would have been ready to close in September. On December 23rd, I drove that closing package out to Long Island to hand deliver the closing documents to the title closer because I had to meet that deadline and nobody was trusting FedEx. Like, we were all so worried anything could go wrong. I drove the package to Long Island.
But the construction stopped. So was the unit move-in ready?
It was. So we only got stopped for, I want to say 3 or 4 months. So
Okay.
whereas I could have closed probably in September if we hadn't been closed, I really got pushed back. And of course, my client was all over the contractors. And then we were praying that DOB would issue the C of O in time. And, with enough pressure, it's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure. And there are certain people who become the point for the most of the aggression by players in. I know the title company usually gets a decent amount of crap from the attorneys for things that are beyond their control often, but I'm sure that you as the attorney deal with a lot of unhappy people at times.
Yes. And like that's part of my job, and I think for me, like personally, I understand it from both sides. I understand what it's like to be a buyer and someone buying your own house, right? And how important that is and how exciting that is and stressful.
Yep.
So I get it. And the buyers are trying to plan, right? Mortgage rates, movers, children going to school. So I think just because of who I am, I get both sides. And I really just try to manage expectations, as best you can.
So you're one of the empathetic lawyers.
Oh, definitely. That's probably, I
Well,
don't know if that's a superpower, but I am definitely a very empathetic person.
you know what? Having dealt with many lawyers, I think empathy in anything you're doing is a great thing to have, but particularly in the law, you don't normally come across a lot of empathy. So I think that's fantastic. That's a value add that you really can't put a price on. So that's fantastic. But
Thank you.
I think the fact that you drove out to Long Island, that you're willing to go, I hope the developer appreciated it.
They really did. They're such a good group of people, and they really did. And look, it's one of those things where I'm in this transaction. I'm not somebody who's going to sit here and say, well, that's not my job or that's your job. Or if it benefits my client and they need to close, then I'll do whatever I can to help facilitate that.
You know what, on a smaller scale, certainly not a sponsored new development building, but we've had situations where we mandate for the most part that a boundary line agreement be signed. We don't go for the affidavit thing because that's not really protecting our client. And I've had situations where the attorneys don't want to deal with it. The the seller of the house doesn't want to go to the neighbor and deal with it. So I end up going to the neighbor and dealing with it. And it's like you driving out the paperwork, me going to the neighbor is not necessarily in the list of things title companies do, but you do what you have to do to facilitate a deal getting done. That's our job, not to kill deals, to get them done.
Exactly. I mean, that's exactly my job. My job is I'm a deal maker. My clients, whether I'm representing a developer or I'm representing an individual who's buying or selling, my clients are all very successful, intelligent people, and I'm doing service for them. And if they've decided that they want to buy or sell a certain piece of property, it's never my job to say yes or no. It's my job to help them make it happen. And
Right.
sometimes you have to think outside the box a little and get creative and just find solutions.
Well, you want to make it happen while at the same time protecting them.
Definitely. That's my job. And so that's okay when I have to tell them the hard reality and, these are your risks. It's my job to always tell you the worst case scenario because I never want you to come back to me a year later and discover something that you should have known about.
Right.
It's my job to tell you up front. So you go in as an educated buyer.
100%. Our job, a lot of my job is educating people. A lot of your job is educating people. Have you ever recommended to somebody that they maybe should avoid a deal and they decide to go through with it anyway?
So, I would say I've really never said don't do a deal. I think I have told people based on my experience, and this is just my experience, when my clients buy in co-ops that are less than, let's say, 6 units, inevitably each one of them has had a problem and eventually has had to either sell or move out or end up in litigation for whatever reason. In my experience, the 6 units or less has always caused a problem. So I just tell them about my experience and then it's up to them.
So our job certainly as a title company is to facilitate deals getting done. But we do sometimes get situations where families are involved, where trusts are involved, where death is involved, where a lawsuit could be the result of contentiousness within units who are, but we never tell anyone not to, but we do like you give our recommendation that you may be buying a lawsuit, and it's critical. You have
Oh,
to.
definitely. Absolutely. I mean, I had a client where they bought 6 acres. This was a crazy story. They bought 6 acres. There was, a beautiful house on there. But during our due diligence, we discovered that there was actually this small little triangular piece of the property that was technically not owned by the seller. It made me a little mad too, because the seller knew about it and didn't tell us. I had to uncover it and then go to them. And as long as my client understood what that meant to them and what it could potentially mean down the road if some executor or some heir of the deceased who actually owned that little triangular piece came forward, it would be a lawsuit.
It was the neighbor's property.
It had never been transferred. So it was this weird, it had been a subdivision and this one little triangular piece had never been transferred. I just think maybe it was just an oversight. I don't know. Somebody made a mistake.
It was a 6-acre property. Where on the property was the triangle situated? In a critical
So it was a unique piece of property where there was an easement through it, because my client's property was attached to the public road, but there were 2 houses behind it. So there was an easement going across my client's property. So on one side of the easement was the house, and on the other side of the easement was a much smaller piece of the property, and that's where it was.
Yeah, no, you run across some very, very interesting things. And, I often talk to people where they nickel and dime over their attorney. And, you're dealing with wealthier types of clients, but, there are clients where, buying a house is it's a stretch. And instead of spending X on an attorney, they'll spend Y on an attorney, and it's like you're buying what's probably going to be your most expensive and important asset, and you're nickel and diming over the person whose job it is to protect you. And it absolutely makes no sense, but that's human nature.
Yes, but we hear that a lot. I hear that almost every week. And people will call me and then say, well, I'm too expensive. And then they'll go use someone else. And I always say, listen, call me. I'm always here to help you, even if you choose not to use me. But this is the biggest transaction you will probably ever do in your life. And I know it's going to be probably the most stressful. It's very personal. It's very stressful. And inevitably, most of them come back when they have a problem. You mentioned a boundary line. I had this gentleman call me last summer. His daughter was buying a $2 million house in Westchester, going with this attorney, and a portion of the pool and the pool equipment was on the neighbor's property. And the buyer's attorney, his daughter's attorney, said to him something like, I don't get paid enough to deal with this. And I said, why don't you just go get a boundary line agreement signed? And they went with her, and it was fine. That's who their lawyer was. But then they called me when they had a problem, and I helped him solve it.
Right. That's interesting, but that's the empathy thing. We often tell people, we always tell people, listen, you should always get a second opinion on your title bill, because the premium is the same, but the costs certainly aren't. And, even if you don't use us, we'll give you the title bill, you take it to your attorney, you tell your attorney to go to the title company, and they lower the fees. But, listen, you always have to give back. Whatever it is you're doing in life, always give back. So you started practicing, and I'm not, I think you were probably in your teens when you did, in the 90s. Now, how did you get your clients? Because you have some big clients.
So it's the firm I'm with. I was really lucky. I graduated law school, and like most young people at that age, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do with my career. I just knew I wanted to be in New York City, right? So exciting. I wanted to be in the city. And I ended up interviewing with John D'Agostino, and he had started the firm, and I was his first hire. And from there it grew. And that was long before all this social media and long before the podcast. And, John and I were such a great team. And he would always say to me, Tina, we're going to get business because we're going to do a great job for this developer. And he's going to go talk to his friends and his buddies. And 27 years later,
So how did John get the business?
oh, he is a hustler, man. So smart and a hustler, and taught himself so many things, like way back when they had the J51 tax exemption and tax abatement programs, taught himself that, became the expert in it, and he just put himself out there.
So he was a networking fool.
Yeah, and long before any social media, it was, do a really good job, service your clients, be there for them, and they're going to talk and refer clients to you. And that's how it happened. I get so many phone calls from people in such high-powered positions that I'm like, wow, why is this person calling me? And they'll say, oh, my friend is so-and-so. He's one of your developers, so.
That's incredible. I mean, it is, is he kind of the same age?
Who, John? Oh, he retired. I'm sorry to say, just this past December, John retired.
Wow.
But I spoke to him yesterday.
I mean, and he's doing well.
Oh, he's doing great. He's doing great, and we're all still in touch. This was his baby, this firm. So,
you know what? Listen, I came up and visited you in your office, and the firm is very, very impressive. The people there are great. You can tell that the people there are all very bright, and and now that you're out here, now that you're in the universe of social media, I mean, you're gonna explode. The offers for podcasts are gonna just come out of the woodwork.
oh, I hope so. This is so fun. Like I'm always in the background doing work, and this is so fun, especially after COVID and all being in our homes. It's so fun to reconnect with people again. And I could talk real estate all day.
And you know what? You've got the personality, you've got the enthusiasm, you've got the excitement. I mean, you're great. So
Thank you.
a 20-unit sponsored project versus a 200-unit sponsored project. Is it the same? It's
all the same.
So the problems aren't necessarily bigger, it's just the same.
It's all the same. And sometimes over the course of my career, I have to say the smaller projects have actually been more difficult because we've done projects anywhere from even 3 units up, to the 200 plus. And sometimes through my career, we would have these young guys come in and say, oh, I want to be a developer in New York City. And they're so excited. And it's not that easy.
It's really not. Yeah. I mean, my comparison isn't quite the same, but I was talking to somebody who 2 years ago went to sell title for somebody. And I said, hey, how's it going? He goes, I'm not doing it anymore because it's a hell of a lot harder than I thought it was. And it's like, yeah, you know what? Nothing is easy. You have to focus, you have to spend the time, you have to spend the energy, you have to be creative. I mean, there's a lot to everything. And especially, in the law, there's a lot of different ways to tackle the same problem, I would assume, right?
Yes, and things are always changing, right? During my career, even I've seen a lot of changing, whether it's in the banking world or, so I feel like things are always changing. You have to be focused, as you said, and you really have to be detail oriented, and you really need to be able to coordinate so many different aspects of a project all at once. And you need to be thick-skinned. You need to be able to deal with the people who are unhappy and keep going and build a good product, right?
Oh, definitely. So now the architect plays a pretty significant role, not just in designing things, but in a lot of different aspects of the project, right?
They do. The architects we work with a lot, a lot of big names, and they know what they're doing, and every project is different. But yeah, they have a lot of work to do. And like for me, when I have clients who are buying in a new development, It wasn't one where I was the sponsor, but they were referred to me. So I read the plan and I represent them. I always say to them, for me, let a year go by after someone has been living in that building, right? Because you could have the best architect, the best plans, the best, but until things are actually being used and people are living in there, you need to go through like every season to work out the kinks and make sure everything is working properly.
So you would recommend that they not buy a resale for a year once the building is up and operating?
Most people, when they buy from my developers, they don't sell that quickly. Some people will buy as investments from my sponsor, and some, will be buying for their own primary residences. But when they call with, their buy, or if it's one of my sponsor buildings and a buyer's attorney should call and say, "Oh, my client is having this issue." My reaction is always, is my developer addressing it? Because the best thing we can do is, thank you for bringing this to our attention. Let us now get our crew in there and look at it. Let us investigate it. Let us fix it. If a developer is ignoring you, well, that's a problem, but give them the opportunity to fix it.
You have an arsenal of developers you work with. Are some not sterling?
I would say, I think I stand behind all my guys. My developers, they're just such good people. And most of them, I have to tell you, I've been working with them for most of my career. It's project after project after project. So I really get to know them.
Do you get invited to weddings and bar mitzvahs?
Oh, I've been to bar mitzvahs. I went Cirque du Soleil performers. I've been to weddings. I've been to my client's wife's 50th birthday party. When I had my son 14 years ago, my developers were sending baby gifts,
It's great. So
yeah.
you're not just a fly by night, you do the deal and guy. You actually have relationships.
Yes.
That's great. That's great. So now on the purchase side, you have you get some well-known people who are referred to you.
Yes. Look, I represent, a lot of very wealthy individuals who are buying. Some, they own multiple homes all over the world. Some they're buying in New York for their very first time. Some are, A-list celebrities that everybody would know their name. And for me, every deal I treat the same. Everybody deserves my best, my service, my respect. And I'm just the lawyer, right? Like, I'm just here to do my job. I have to protect them all. I need to do all my due diligence. And but yes, I have been lucky enough to also represent some really interesting people.
Which is fantastic. So now I would be remiss if I didn't touch on legislation, regulation, New York City as an entity to deal with, to build with, to live with. 421A, good cause eviction, local law 97. I mean, there's just a never-ending stream of issues. And I'm curious what you think or what your developers think in terms of, it seems to me, and I'll give you my opinion, that the city leaders, the New York State leaders, tend to pander to whoever it is they think is the most uh, plentiful of constituents, which in this case are tenants. Whereas, and then they make laws like the 2019 law that on the surface look like they're good for tenants, but if you really think about it, they're going to be terrible for tenants. But the short term. Anyway, I'm pontificating. I always do that when it comes to politics. But what's your opinion about the environment for
So
building?
for me, in my world, I don't do anything with landlords or tenants. So I'm not in that space. My developers were always selling condos for sale, and sometimes, somebody might need to move in, like, prior to closing. So I'll do a quick interim use and occupancy agreement. But I'm really not involved with landlord tenants or developers who are doing rental buildings.
Well, so the people the buyers who you work with, they never, and I'm guessing it's probably the case, they never rent their apartments.
Oh, no, actually they do, but I don't represent the buyers in my sponsor buildings. So in my sponsor buildings, we do have a lot of investors who will buy. And
Yeah.
then they will use their own brokers to go rent the apartments for them. And then they'll have their residential tenants in place.
All right. I'm just curious, like if you have somebody who's buying in a non-sponsored building that you had nothing to do with, you know, do those issues ever come up? Does someone ever say, listen, am I going to have a hard time renting this? Am I going to have a hard time raising the rent? I know they have some new law where you can't, after 5 years, or something where you can't ask the felony history of a potential tenant. And, there's just so many things that if I was looking to rent my apartment out, I'd probably want to know, but I'm not allowed to ask. So,
Right, right. No, I did hear that as well. Most of my clients are buying for their own personal use.
right.
Most of my clients, whether I have a lot of parents who buy for their children. A lot of parents who will call and say, oh, my daughter, we live in California and my daughter just got her first job in New York City, and we want to buy her this co-op or condo to live in. So I deal with a lot of that, a lot of parents buying for children.
That's great. You know what? That's a wonderful, kids they're all getting to that age now. So, or a lot of them. Mine are past that age, but well, you'll be in that position someday.
Well, he's only 14. I got a way to go.
That is true, but I got to tell you, I've had a great time talking to you because we really didn't talk about a lot of the things that I thought we could talk about. It was more interesting things. But you're a fantastic guest, and I know that you will be the belle of the podcast ball.
Mike, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. I can't thank you enough for having me on your show.
Believe me, it's my pleasure. So sit back and just enjoy our outro music. And
I will.
I want to get your opinion on what you think of it.
Okay.
Come on.
Thank you for listening to Do You Ever Wonder? And we hope that you enjoyed the show. Next week, we will have another terrific guest telling their story. And if there are any specific topics you'd like to hear more about, please don't hesitate to let us know. Our curiosity, like yours, knows no bounds. Please subscribe and like and share this episode on your social media. See you next week.